Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Dr. Glenn is a clinical psychologist and former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leaving the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Before we get started, if you haven't downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
I'm here with a kind-hearted gentleman named Kevin, who has agreed to let me share this time with you so you can benefit from his wisdom and experience and strength and hope and unique insights, as well as his stumbles and falls and trials and tribulations and all of the above. Kevin, how are you?
I'm doing well, Glenn. How you doing?
Good. Can you catch me up with regards to food and exercise around the last month or so? What's new and exciting? What's been good? What's been bad?
This really marks month 3 for me in the program. And this past month has been yet another month of real learning. Also during the month, I had a setback. I don't even think of them as setbacks anymore, Glenn. It's the outlook of the program has really helped me change, of course, weight loss, but also the way I see the work that I'm doing. And that's been great. About 2 weeks ago, I had an attack of gout. I wonder if it's something that other listeners deal with. I haven't had an attack in probably 3 or 4 years, but this one was very painful and very fierce. It affects my foot and I can't walk very well. And it's very painful to do regular chores like loading up firewood from my wood stove and things like that. And what happened was over the course of about 2 weeks, very slowly, I started to bend my rules and feel sorry for myself. You know, my goblin was saying, just because I'm suffering, you shouldn't have to put up with this, or you already have so much on your plate. Why don't we just get some more food? Or little tiny slips, and did fine. But 2 weeks in, whammo, I had a real binge, an old school binge.
Kevin, just so I understand the timing.
Yeah.
You had the gout attack first. So you were eating healthy and unplanned, and then the gout came on.
Right.
And then the pig said, well, you normally get gout when you eat badly, so you must be eating badly.
It probably is like Goblin talking. I'm embarrassed by the fact that I have gout in general. In particular, in this particular instance, my goblin started using this infirmity to slowly bend the rules until about 5 days ago, I had a real binge. And I haven't had a serious binge in the 3 months I've been on the program.
Okay.
And I'm learning that every time I have made some kind of an error, it's never just about that one instant. It usually is a series of small, slight steps that lead me up to that time where I actually break a rule. Things tend to accumulate with me. And that's why I have to constantly remind myself to be vigilant about what my goblin is saying to me at the time. I went through the recovery process. I have 5 days back on plan, feeling really good. The gout is slowly going away, so I'm a little bit more active, and I've righted the ship.
This is really important because a lot of people fall down and stay down at this point in the game who do really well for a couple of months, and then they make a mistake, and then their pig says, well, you're not perfect, therefore you're nothing.
Yeah.
Therefore, this is silly. Let's just binge until we can find something else.
Yeah.
I want to come back to explaining the appropriate use of the energy of perfectionism to eat healthy, because most people in our culture use it in the exact opposite way that it should be used. Yeah. But if you can take the binge seriously and forgive yourself with dignity and analyze what happened, by how much did you miss the target, in what direction, and what adjustments need to be made, that can often be the most important thing that you do to recover.
Yes. And I have had some thoughts about this, Glenn. I was really glad that I got to talk to you today because I've been thinking about it. And in the past, I've been overweight since I was a kid. So Like many of the listeners, I've tried everything under the sun. And what's so common for me is to hit this 2 or 3 or even 6 month mark. And I slowly let bad decisions start creeping in. I let the goblin in, and then eventually it just deteriorates completely. And I feel like I can't go back to where I was. With this program and the way that you and others have talked about this perfectionism, I have new thoughts now. This is exactly in other programs where I would have broken down and left and considered myself a failure. This time, I'm seeing it as a learning opportunity. I went back and realized, gosh, this wasn't just one event. Look at all the little things that happened that led up to this event. That's how it happens every time. I'm a teacher, and the thing that's really hitting me is this idea in teaching. Teachers talk to each other about students owning their learning. And that is something that's happening to me now. I did the intensive program. I'm a month away from that. So I'm really working much more on my own now. I'm starting to own this learning now. I'm starting to separate myself in a positive way, what I've learned in the program, and incorporate that for my own. I'm starting to own this. And the recovery process is the thing that's helping me do that.
So talk to me about what you actually discovered in going through the recovery process with regards to the 5 little things that happened that led to your mistake, and then what you've learned and what you're going to do differently.
What I've learned is that those tiny slip-ups, those little bends in rules where I'm not breaking rules, but I know I'm doing things that are kind of pushing the boundaries, I need to take those seriously. Not with punishment, not with dread, but hey, wait a minute, watch out. Keep an eye out now for that goblin because it's starting to whisper again to you. I can have days where I don't hear from the goblin. I need to take these as reminders to be aware, to stay awake, to not fall asleep at the wheel and let the goblin take over. And that's big learning for me. And the other part of the learning is what happens afterwards, to not fall into despair, to not add this to a long list of my failures in this area, and actually to learn from it and keep going, just keep getting up again. Both of those things are big parts of my learning.
You really go back to the archer's analogy. An Olympic archer who misses the bullseye by a little bit doesn't ignore the miss. They distinguish missing the bullseye by a little bit from missing the target entirely. But there's feedback that's available in having missed the target by a little bit that allows you to make the right adjustments. Most people in our culture think that, well, it was just a tiny miss. It wasn't really a binge. You can just go get back on track and let it go. And it's true that you will need to let it go and avoid allowing your food goblin or your pig to wear you down and tell you that you're pathetic and exaggerate the negativity. It's true that you need to do that. Even if you make a big miss, that's true. But it's also true that you missed the target. And if your goal is to be a better archer, then we need to analyze what went wrong and figure out how to make the adjustments before you totally let it go. This relates to the energy of perfectionism I wanted to talk about. Most people in our culture think you should aim at the target without perfectionism. Most people think perfectionism is a bad thing entirely. But it turns out that the psychology of winning actually does involve a perfectionistic focus. You're aiming at the bullseye with the totality of your being, because in the absence of that, the maybe I'll hit it, maybe I won't attitude will drain energy from your ability to focus on the goal. And so you actually do want to aim with perfection, but when you miss, you want to forgive yourself with dignity. What we do in our culture for the most part is the opposite. And the reason perfectionism harms us, and the way I like to say it is that the food goblin or the pig is using perfectionism in the exact opposite way of how it's supposed to be used. The pig says, don't bother aiming with perfectionism. Don't bother focusing on the target, just do the best you can. And that just means I'm going to try for a little while until I don't feel like it anymore. We want to flip paradigms on the pig. The pig says, aim haphazardly, kind of play blind archery and shoot at a fuzzy target. Do the best you can until you don't feel like it anymore. And then when you miss, beat yourself up, then perfectionistically say that you're pathetic and even one mistake means that you're awful and you might as well just binge the rest of the day. So what we want to do is the opposite, is commit with perfection and forgive yourself with dignity.
And I find at my stage where I'm at, I don't feel like all of this is automatic to me. Those two states are actually hard, not hard, but they require a lot of energy. They don't come naturally. I have to give energy to both of those states to make sure that they happen. That will become habit, I hope, this is the part of like the person who's 3 months in. These are the kind of things that I think I'm wrestling with, but it's very interesting to me.
Well, it's because you're engaged in behavior change. You're trying to change behavior loops that you've set up over the course of a lifetime. And it's going to take some energy at first. The energy is front loaded. It doesn't require this level of focus and attention indefinitely. When you stabilize your food plan and you're with it for 6 months or a year, it's kind of just like driving.
That's good to know.
There's still rules that you follow. You're still awake. You're scanning the periphery. You're not closing your eyes at the wheel, but you can talk to your friends and listen to music or a seminar or radio or something.
Yeah.
What else did you learn about yourself from the experience?
Something else that is coming up in this past month, I don't know if it's related to this or not, is something that I really wanted to ask you to talk more about. And that is that, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think somewhere you wrote that the pig needs permission actually for you to actually act on its whims, or I call it the goblin. So when the goblin wants something from me, wants me to do something, it's telling me about it and starts to convince me how good this is going to be because it still needs permission. It still needs permission somehow from mission control or the frontal lobe or however I want it. But that fact is fascinating to me. It gives me more power over this goblin because it's still asking for permission. It still needs to convince me to act. It cannot act completely by itself. And that's actually really empowering. Can you say more about this?
Well, you understand it. The pig is the inferior animal. It can only get fed if you use your hands and your legs and your arms and your mouth and your tongue.
Yep.
One of the biggest insights for me and a turning point for me in my recovery 12, 13 years ago was when I realized that the pig wouldn't talk at all if it could just go get its own pig slop. It was a turning point because it convinced me that I'm not powerless. I'm the pig's master, no matter what it's pretending. I forget about that. I don't forget about that fact, but I forget that I wrote that sometimes.
I'm coming back to it now 3 months in because I'm having that moment too, where I'm realizing slowly I'm giving up on this idea that this goblin controls my life and I have to be scared of the goblin because it could take over at any minute. No, wait a minute. It's actually different. I've always been in charge. I always will be in charge. And look at this poor, pathetic little goblin trying to convince me that what I need to do is something radically different than I decided to do a long time ago. So it's really empowering. Just that little fact really makes a difference.
But you're not straight out told in most of our culture and most of the treatment programs and most of the mythology about what it means to have an eating disorder and recover from an eating disorder. You're not straight out told that you're in charge. People will tell you that you're powerless, that there's this uncontrollable urge. And so there's a lot of confusion. It was this insight and the power of my recovery after this insight that led me to the conclusion that feigning powerlessness, pretending to be powerless, was the cardinal sin in overeating. Because essentially, you're adopting a devil made me do it attitude. I don't have control. This thing inside me has control.
Yeah.
I am oblivious to it. I'm unconscious to it. It just takes over and I can't do anything about it. There's a whole movement of people who will support that idea and tell you that you've got a mysterious, progressive, chronic disease, which they couldn't identify like other diseases, by the way. You couldn't identify a disease in a corpse. You couldn't identify this in a corpse. Other diseases, if you take the person and you put them in jail and take their substance away, like tuberculosis would get worse. But chronic alcoholism, chronic overeating, it's almost immediately cured when you take away the person's ability to keep doing that. So it's very, very odd that we're told that we are powerless and the devil is making us doing it.
Yeah, and it's kind of insidious. I worked for a year or two with Bright Line Eating, which has some similarities in terms of setting really clear boundaries for yourself and rules. But that, along with many other programs, put me in defense mode, where I have to watch out and build up my defenses and protections at all times against this onslaught. And I understand why it feels that way. When I put my goblin in control, I feel like I can't necessarily control it. But now I'm slowly starting to really sink in. I've got this choice. I'm not someone who is defenseless against this. I am someone who is completely capable of putting that goblin in the cage and saying no to these voices that ask me to do certain things. And I feel like it's undoing decades of thinking, which is why it takes a long time.
You know, when you first learn how to walk, kids have to be taught to pay attention. They've got to focus a bit on their balance, and they've got to have the right encouragement, and they fall down a lot. It's a lot of work for them to figure it all out. But then eventually we figure it all out, and it's just second nature. I can't remember the last time I thought about walking correctly, right?
Yeah. I thought about it recently, but that's gout.
Oh, because okay. Well, I actually have a little bit of sciatica, so I know what you mean. If you've been crawling around all these years and all of a sudden you're going to teach yourself a different way of locomoting, you're going to have to pay attention for a while. When you learn how to drive, it's got to be a real focus. You can't be super relaxed in the beginning. You have to not only study the rules of the road so you know what to do at a four-way stop sign and who gets to go first, but you have to learn how to scan the periphery and go at the right speed when you're approaching a light that's about to turn red, and how to stay in your lane and what to do when you want to change lanes, and how to look for other cars. And it's actually very dangerous if you don't pay attention in the beginning. But eventually that all becomes second nature also. We do progress from stage to stage, and we develop skills and abilities and eventually character traits that can sustain us the rest of our life without a tremendous amount of effort. I don't know enough about bright line eating, but I can tell you about the 12-step programs. What it has in common with that is the idea that you have to be hypervigilant. We say it's only for a while. It's not forever. The programs in our culture mostly will tell you that learning does not take place, and that you're going to have to be really vigilant forever. Remember there's this Twilight Zone where these monks had captured the devil and kept him in a castle in a cage using the staff of truth. And one day a stranger wanders by, and the devil had to do was whisper to the stranger, and the stranger removed the staff of truth. And it was like the full force then was unleashed on the world. And it's true that your goblin will whisper to you. It's true that it will periodically try to come up with stuff, but eventually it gives up. And the reason for that, it's a byproduct of our survival drive, having been hijacked by industry. I always say fat cats in white suits with mustaches, laughing all the way to the bank when you look for love in a box or a bag or a container. It's a byproduct of our survival drive, and our survival drive is very efficient. So it's a survival drive gone wrong, but we are evolved or designed or created, however you want to look at it. We're created to conserve energy. Just look at any of the extinction research and behavioral research. If our brains are not presented with a reward, if the reward is removed and it's removed consistently and it's really not available, eventually the brain learns that that reward is not available for that craving, and it goes on to crave something else. We don't crave things that we're never going to get because it's a waste of energy. That's not a survival advantage, and that quality would have died out.
Biologically, it's inefficient.
So we're wired to win is the thing. And you captured that in your observation that the pig needs permission because we're superior.
Right.
And in the animal kingdom, the inferior animal that's dependent upon the leader will cut and run if you stare it down. If you act inferior, if an alpha wolf acts frightened or fearful, then the inferior wolf will see that as an opportunity to challenge and take control. Subordinate animals in the animal kingdom are frightened when clear leadership isn't shown. They're afraid that the pack is going to dissolve, and so they feel like they have to do something.
Right.
But if you assert yourself as the leader, then you're superior and it will submit because it has to, because you're stronger.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me.
What was it like getting him back on track? How many days did it take you to start feeling better? What did you do to get through the first day? What did your goblin try to say? How did you talk it out of its nonsense?
This was another great part about this stumble that I had, is that I had stumbled previously in a much smaller way and used the recovery process. Even though I knew it wasn't a major event, I pretended that it was. I would have gone through the recovery process one time. This time, when I did have a more serious binge, I knew exactly what to do, and I stopped myself within 4 hours. Normally, Glenn, this would have been something that could have lasted for weeks or months, or I would have given up in this program completely.
What did you do to stop yourself? How did you do that?
The first most important thing was that I knew that I had this process. So I was feeling bad about myself. I was upset about what I had done and starting to surround myself with all those thoughts of, oh my gosh, here we go again. This doesn't work. And I went through the recovery process using the video provided, and I understood what I did wrong. And then I actually wrote about it intensively that night. The next morning, I wrote about it again and kept monitoring how I was feeling up until today. And so the bounce back, the recovery was much, much faster. And for me, the reason that happened was because I already knew the tool. The tool was there. I knew I could use it. I knew how to use it. It does take time and it does take effort, but I went through it, and that's what bounced me back really quickly. I'm proud of how fast I recovered.
What you have to watch out for, by the way, for people listening, are your pigs saying, we've done really well for a couple of months. And what Glenn and Kevin are talking about right now sounds really important. We really do need to make a mistake so that we can practice recovering. The solution for that, imagine that you had a binge. It's not to actually have one, but go back and think about one of the last ones that you had and put yourself in that state of mind and how awful it felt, and think about what the pig said to you. And you can do the whole thing as a postmortem from your memories from years ago, or you can even just make it up and still learn a lot of the same things. So you don't actually have to break your plan in order to do this.
Just to do that. Yeah. And I could see how my goblin would try to talk me into that.
It took me a while to figure that out once we started talking about this, because then everybody was binging to have the experience.
Yeah. But there is something about the tool. Like my first building project ever was during the pandemic, and I built a chicken coop. And I did not know very much about building, but I used a T-square for the first time. And I noticed that I had to remind myself, after I used the tool for the first time, I still had to remind myself, wait, no, you don't have to do it that way. You have the tool to help you. It took a while before using the tool became a habit. And that's, I think, what helped me this time around, making the recovery process much shorter than it normally would have been for me. Good to use the tool once or twice so you know it's there.
Was there any particular squeal in retrospect when you look at the binge that was difficult for you? And if so, how did you refute it?
The most common part of it was the squeal that said, you're down right now. I was physically suffering with this gout. You're down right now, so it's just too much for you to actually keep up with these rules and the effort that's required. You're already down. Don't put more on your plate. So that's part of what I do with myself, and maybe part of my upbringing. But that was the squeal that really, I think, was most pervasive. All I really had to do was really look at it carefully. In the writing I did in the recovery process, I saw that, look, when you're down, when other things are going on, and I hear that goblin saying, look, things are so tough right now. You should just let go of your rules and just loosen up things a little bit. Actually, it's keeping up with my rules and keeping up with my self-care. Whatever situation I'm in, it's going to bring me out of this faster and stronger. Yeah. That's what I need. This is the perfect time to work hard at keeping up with my self-care rather than letting it go just because one part of my life isn't going the way I want it to go.
The only way out is through.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you do another interview in a month or two?
Oh, I'd be really happy to. It's always fun to talk to you. Thank you, Glenn.
Okay, terrific.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. If you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.